So we start off as usual with our peace prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Punuktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astama Vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both and nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our studies be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. So if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. Why do we call a follower of the Vedic literature an Aryan? Okay. I don't know that we do. So my counter question is that I don't know who calls it this Aryan.
Oh, it's in the Bhagavad Gita as it is.
Okay, can you tell me what is the verse?
Well, it's in the glossary.
It's in the glossary. Which version do you have?
Well, I have the one from Swami Prabhupada. So it's the one from the Bhaktivedanta book trust, indeed.
Sorry, from?
So it's from the Bhaktivedanta book trust.
From ISKCON, I guess, Swamiji.
Yes, it is. It is.
Sorry?
It's the one from ISKCON.
Oh, from ISKCON. Okay. Yes. Well, of course, the original Bhagavad Gita does not have any glossaries and so on. Let's stick to that. And there's no need for a glossary. But let's deal with the Sanskrit word Arya. Arya is an adjective, if you like. It means a noble person. So somebody who is a noble person, somebody who is elevated in spirit. One of the wonderful Vedic prayers will be, may noble ideas come to us from all sides. Now, how did it become known in any different way? Well, because in the days of the British Raj, the British were keen to inform the people of India that because of similar linguistic traits, that is Indo-European languages, then there must be some commonality of origin, ethnic origin. It's a very unfortunate way of thinking because it has caused a lot of difficulties, including Hitler attributing a superior race to the Aryans, or Aryans as many people would say. So it's actually been linked to a kind of racialism. Not only that, but also linked to Darwin's theory of evolution, where in fact in his Origin of Species, he seems to assert that there are superior races and so on. Anyway, Professor Max Muller, the Indologist, was persuaded to introduce what was called the Aryan theory, or the Aryan invasion theory. It's a very controversial theory even today. The idea is that some 1500 BC, there was a people who came perhaps from the Caucasus or something. And the Aryans, whoever they were, who had a common language, Indo-European or Indo-Aryan language, would have migrated eastward and westward. And so the people who were conquering India were actually the same race as the conquered people, but superior. Superior because their culture was superior, because they conquered a race of people, 3 million people, or 300 million people in India, and a handful of British come and they persuade the Indians that they would be better off under the British Raj. But of course, the British are conquerors, and I don't think there's any example of any conquest historically designed to help the conquered people. Nevertheless, we leave the assessment of that out of it. It was Max Muller, therefore, who introduced this idea, purely a guess, and purely the understanding that if you have any introduction of people coming into a region, it must inevitably be because of invasion. But there's no evidence whatsoever of that anywhere. And even if you do archaeological surveys in the Indus Valley and the Harappan culture and so on, in the northwestern corner of the Indian subcontinent, there you won't find any evidence of a diminishing of the civilization or the population there because of conquest. There's no evidence whatsoever at all. Sorry, invasion, violent invasion. And so it is now a hot topic of contention, with some people even suggesting, no, the people who are indigenous, and let's call them the Vedic people. The Vedic people, they actually, about, let's say, 7,000 years ago, they actually introduced this Indian culture, ancient Vedic culture, westwards. So that even if we talk about Irish, we find some linguistic links making Irish language an Indo-European language. But the fact that there are a few words in common and roots in common doesn't really hold up for an overwhelming influence. If you have North Indian languages that are derived from Sanskrit, for example, then you can see the clear link. You can see how Hindi, for example, is extremely close to Sanskrit. And all those Northern Indian languages are like that. Now, the Aryan invasion theory doesn't hold up to scrutiny either from genetic drift studies. And genetically, of course, the Northern Indian people would have been subject to greater influences of invasion through the Indus Valley. But fundamentally, we have to understand that geographically what was called ancient Persia or Iran. Iran is the corruption of the Sanskrit Aryan, meaning noble person. And so that whole region was one region. And so when we look at it from this point of view and say, well, it's not a race of people, let's do away with that. The original meaning in the Vedic references would be noble person. It is our ambition as humans to aspire to be noble people. May we be nobler and nobler and nobler. So to link Arya as a race of people, for example, or a Vedic people, or to link it with a culture. And the question is like this, we'll recall it again. Why do we call a follower of the Vedic literature an Aryan? We don't. And so some people may, but it would be erroneous. What we can say is that India as a subcontinent is like a vast federation. And the popular term for the religion, if you were to combine it, saying Hindu or Hinduism, is a term, of course, derived from the Indus Valley, where the Persians came in and couldn't say Sind. It's the Sind province. And so Sindhu became Hindu. Anybody south of that is Hindu. But it's a geographic term. Anyway, popularly applied to religion. Let's go along with it for the time being. And if we do that, we'll find the breadth of belief, many and varied, because they were generous enough, firstly, not to persecute any country religious idea. There was no persecution in India with regards to holding a different view. So that's the one point. And the other point is, what is the thing that welds the people together if you have so many different opinions, so many different practices? If you have such a generosity that you see, the supreme principle cannot even be thought of. So how do we relate to such a thing? We have to look to the various glories that provide us with a sense of balance, a sense of harmony, that provide us with a sense of organization and rhythm in the universe. and learn the art of tracing them back to its origin. And so that is the practice. Now, where do all the fundamental ideas come from? Well, generally, there are 5 principles within this belief system that welds this multiplicity, this league of religions together. And this is quite important because when you ask people who think of themselves as Hindus and ask them what is Hinduism, particularly in Ireland where Indian Hindus children go to school and people inevitably ask what is Hinduism. And since we are involved here with interfaith, it's a common question. And often there is no answer. Or as you shrug of the shoulders and people say, oh, it's a way of life. It's just a way of life, which implies that any other system is not a way of life, and that would be a little unfair to say the least. So it's more than a way of life. It has foundational principles, and these principles are based firmly in the Vedas. And what makes people orthodox is belief in the authority, either partly or fully, of the Vedas. That's the most fundamental principle. So we start off with that. Then what are these Vedas? These Vedas are discoveries. These discoveries are my truth. We call these rishis. And these ancient seers discovered through introspection and a technique of concentration. That means taking your attention and using it like a laser beam so that it becomes an illuminating factor. And once it is an illuminating factor, the secret behind gets fully revealed. And the truths that were discovered are called Vedas, from the root vid, to know, to see. So these were seen truths, understood truths, just as we know and have discovered, if you like, gravity, or the principle of gravity, or the principle of electrical energy. We don't call it a theory, we know it is true, and anybody who denies it will have to explain why we are all seated here, not flying off into the atmosphere. What's holding us here? This is something called gravity. In this same way, when we discover, when we have a look at our own nature and look at the world around in terms of cosmology, in terms of physical structure, it comes out as Vedas. These Vedas, these discoveries, are seen to be expired truth, expirated truths, not inspired text, expired text, expired truths. They were always there and are divided into 2 sections. One is called the Karma Kanda, to do with rituals and to do with the relative world. And the other really is to do with the underlying truth, which can never be expressed, the supreme reality. And this is called Jnana Kanda, the knowledge portion. But you see, the supreme reality, or what most people understand to be God, is beyond the range of our thought. And so, even in the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find Arjuna making this statement, "Thou knowest thyself by thyself," he says to Krishna, "O source and Lord of all beings." But this glory, this fundamental glory, is indicated by the order and the rhythm that we find present everywhere. We find it in laws, and laws are seen to be immutable from the modern point of view. And so we can see such conversations in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we'll find it, where Yajnavalkya and Gargi are speaking and they're having a conversation. And he talks about the imperishable. We can look up that passage if we want. We must learn, therefore, in a practical way, what the sages, the importance of the sages' discoveries, that we can direct our thoughts from any aspect of this glory to the blissful presence, which is all around, and especially in our own heart. time and time again in this knowledge portion called Jnanakanda. We call this Upanishads. Upanishad, the inference is Upani, that is sitting near to a competent teacher. We have the image sometimes of the students sitting at the feet of the teacher, learning. And so we can view this relative existence in different ways. But the most important thing, therefore, is the authority of the Vedas makes people orthodox or not orthodox. Not belief in God, but belief in the authority of the Vedas. This makes what is called Ashtika. Ashtika, orthodox person in the Vedic religion, if you want to call it that, or the Vedic system. Bearing in mind that if the Vedic system derived from the Vedas applies to truth, then it's universal and applies to everyone, everywhere, for all time. And this is the great, great importance of studying this. It has nothing to do with a select group of people. So, second principle is that there is a supreme principle beyond the range of our thought, and that in the heart where we find our own innermost self in depth, our highest conclusion is that that which we call Atman is one and the same with this supreme principle that we call Brahman. And supposing you can't grasp that, supposing you feel there's a separation and you would like a separation, and supposing you think also, in addition to that or supplementary to that, that we are connected with that supreme principle in some way, well, then we can say that the individual life monad that we have is either connected or one and the same with that supreme principle. And so this is the second tenet that we have in the Vedic system. The third will be to do with nature, the relative world that we live in. And we can view it in a helpful way. So, for example, if we cannot relate to that which is beyond our thought, then if we happen to think that maybe this world is a creation that began at one moment and goes on to a conclusion and then goes into a state of quiescence and then recycles. This recycling model is very, very much part of the Vedic system. Whether you think that it is a localized recycling or an overall recycling taking eons and eons and eons of years, but if you happen to think that this is a creator or a creation, then you look on that supreme being as a creator. You have the luxury of doing that. And if you think that this relative world is something like a protected field, then we can look upon that entity as a protector. Or if you think that this is all a play of waves, physical waves, vital waves, mental waves, intellectual waves, artistic waves, and spiritual waves, then in that case, that entity can be revered as a player or a dancer. So, please, people perceive his sport, but none perceives him, say the Upanishads. Now, this infinite entity is described as self-luminous light, so it's self-luminous. And we have to understand when we talk about nature, it is borrowed luminosity. It is said to be seated amid the organs and reflected in the intellect. And a question the other night was, what is the difference between intellect and consciousness? Well, the intellect is also instrumental. It's a reflector of that pure light of consciousness that sits behind. And it seems to imitate the movements of the intellect. So it thinks as it were, it quivers as it were. This is the language of the Upanishads. For being one with dreams, it gets beyond the waking world, which presents forms of death, is the language of the Upanishads. And death in this context really means ignorance. So, ignorance and all its offshoots or its derivatives from that. So, what will we do with this world? We'll make a list, as it were, and the Bhagavad Gita does it in the 9th, 10th chapters, gives us a list of all the glories, examples of all the glories that act as starting points where we can take that and move inward and discover the truth. Now, the third principle, therefore, is the eternality of this nature, and it runs on causation also. Causation is a fundamental principle of the deterministic world that we relate to. Then, the next principle will be that the only way to discover this is to do what the rishis did. It's through direct perception, not through books, not through learnings, not through lectures, none of this, but through direct perception. And that direct perception requires certain conditions, cleansing conditions. And the methods that we use are methods which are designed to control the overall mind that acts as a seeming fragmenter of this supreme principle. And there are 4 of them, and you know them as yogas. There's karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, and dhyana yoga. Why are these 4? Why not 5? Why not 6? Why not 100? Because the mind has these departments. It has a thinking department, it has a feeling department, it has a willing department, and it also has the capacity to harmonize and make an equilibrium through meditation. Swami Vivekananda says, one or more or all of these can be free, but his emblem suggests, why don't we do all of them? Because we're not exclusively one or the other. And so these 4 methods are there. The most popular and easiest, we have to know, is of course Bhakti Yoga. And if we stick with the Bhagavad Gita, we'll see that for this age, it is the easiest, it is the best. The best is love of God. Why? As I say, it's the easiest. It is a way of rallying our emotions, and anybody who gets angry or frustrated or falls in love or what have you, has certain emotions, energetic movements in the mind that can easily be rallied and directed in this way, lovingly. Now, one beautiful principle within this system, and that is an element of democracy. Which one should we choose? You can choose anything you like, whatever you love the most, because we're all constitutionally different. We all have different personalities. We all have different mental makeups. We all have different likes and dislikes. So you take the aspect or the form that you love the most, and you choose that, and you become dedicated to that, creating a focus of the mind, a rallying point around for your emotions to rally. And so this principle is called a chosen ideal, called Ishta or Ishta Devata, a chosen ideal. And that creates a democracy not seen in any other system. And this then leads to a 5th principle. All religions are true, all paths are true. They have to be true. And why should we argue whether this is true or that this path is valid or that path is valid? All of them are valid, even the ones that seem to be the most obscure. It's all right. I have enough problems with my own path without criticizing somebody else's. So if you're climbing a mountain, you choose your own path. Make your own system. Don't use my broken ladder. So that's the whole idea. Now, none of this has got to do with any race of people. None of this has got to do with a particular type or a race of Vedic people or anything like that. Not at all. We should all be Aryans. We should all be noble people and aspire for the highest. But unfortunately, by introducing this term in a context that you have, that has some people use it in, unfortunately leads to tremendous upheavals and misunderstandings. So it's important that when we have these terms that we go to the root, then we understand what the term means. I hope that explains it.
Thank you, Swami. So according to your your explanation, therefore, it means to from my understanding, it leads to the Noble Eightfold Path that is described in the Buddhism as well.
Well, the Eightfold Path is particularly used for meditation.
Mm.
Okay, but of course, we can't be meditating all the time. Some of us have to work, some of us have to form relationships, and so on. And so, every single part of secular life, so called, can be directed in a spiritual way. And that is why we don't just have this jhana yoga where we find these ashtanga yoga, these eight limbs, eightfold path. But broadly speaking, the first two sections of the Eightfold Path applies to everybody, because we need to become noble in our behavior, in our character. We have to polish up the mind through correct thinking. See, Buddhists have this Eightfold Path, exactly that, right thinking, right occupation, right concentration, all of those kinds of things. So yes, there are 8 of them, but all of them start with things which are noble, things which are correct, things which have a moral implication. In other words, it's a cleansing of the mental field. All spiritual practice is a cleaning of the mental field, regardless of where it comes from, what its origin is, or what method you're using. Well, it's now 11:05. I have to dash toward an appointment. So I'm going to leave it there for today.
Have a lovely day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank you, Swamiji.
thank you.